In this video tutorial, we're going to be talking about table structures and as a data table versus layout table and knowing the difference between the two and when and how to use them. Now, if you're not a screen reader user, let's pretend that you are for just a moment. And on this screen, you will see, or you're going to a school website to find out where the Biology 205 class is going to be held. And you're going to a web page has this information, like what we see on the screen. And this is what you would hear instead of seeing, because the screen reader will read this information to you. Table with 10 columns and 7 rows, department code, class number, session, max enrollment, current enrollment, roll number, day, start time, end time, and so forth. Now, after listening to this information, do you have any idea where Biology 205 is supposed to be held? Well, probably not. When you listen to the table straight through without going to the reading mode in the screen reader, this type of information can be very confusing. And even if when you go into the table reading mode, it can still be confusing if the table is not marked out properly, like here. And now let's take a look at how to format a data table correctly in Joomla. And later we'll be looking at the difference of making data table versus layout table. And I'll show you in the Wave report. I'll explain later. Now, in the backend of Joomla, there are a couple accessibility attributes that you can add to a table to make that more accessible. First of all, when you create a data table like this, where we have multiple columns and rows, and we can see that the first row represents the header row, contains 3 categories: name, birthday, and age, and these are the data cells. But so all that is good for a sighted user, but for a non-sighted user, they rely on the screen reader, and the screen reader is rely on the tags and attributes that you define within the table to know what kind of information or content is in there. So first of all, when you do create this table, that's go into the table properties. You can enable the table captions here and also add a table summary, which you can just type in right in the field. So when you check for table captions, it will give you a spot right on the top of the table to type in your captions. So you can say anything like, this is a data table that shows name, birthday, and age. Or you can put that in a summary. So the difference being is obviously the caption, like the image alt text caption are visible, and the summary are embedded in the code view, which you will recognize by the screen reader, but it will not be visible to the users. So let me show you right here. So that's the summary that we put in from the pop-up window, and it will show right here, and the captions right here, which is visible. But this part will only get read by the screen reader. You won't be able to see that. And then next thing you do is you identified what are the header. The header can be going down in the column. In this case, we want a header row, so you highlight the row, and then you go into table row properties. Then under the drop-down window, you identify this is the table head, which is the header row. And all the other cells will be the table data or the data cells. And that's how you properly identified the table. So now we have those elements identified in the back end. Let's take a look at the front end. So you see the caption, you see the header row. And to show you, since we're not a screen reader user, I'm going to show you how the accessibility attributes will show up when somebody are using those features or assistive technology. So the tool I can show you is called the Wave, in which I will go into detail in the later session of this tutorial. So right now, I'm just going to show you or prove it to you that we have indeed put in those attributes to identify a table header versus column header. So the Wave report, which is scanning the page and identify all the accessibility features, and it will point out if you have any error, which we have two. Like I said, we'll go into details later, and I purposely put in those errors as a demo. So now let's go to the table example. You can see this means it's a data table. That is a layout table. So user right away knows this table contains data. And this layout can be just decorative images. Okay? So they can identify that through the attribute that we identify these are header rows. And by the way, here's a caption, table caption are present. So check. And row headers are here. That's when we use the row property and select from the drop down to identify these as a header. So you announce the header contains name, birthday, and age, and then they will know these are the content, the data. Okay. So now, let's look at the layout table. This is an example of a layout table. You can see a toilet and the text. The visual user can see basement toilets must flush up. And very clear, we can see that in the graphic below, represented in the layout table. However, the screen reader user will hear basement, up, toilets, flush must. And the reason why is because table used for layout is still defined within the cells, and there are certain orders to follow. You can see the cell 1, 2, 3, and 4. It goes from left to right, top to bottom. So that will be the order it reads in the screen reader. And that's why we do not encourage people to use a table for layout purpose. For exactly the reason you think the graphic and the text that makes sense on the page visually, but it might not represent or shows the same meaningful content when the screen reader's reading through it. So layout table is not recommended. But when you do have to use a table for layout purposes, that's why adding the attributes and labels are necessary. So you help identify that this is a layout table, not a data table. It doesn't contain the proper cells and rows, columns and rows. And that's where a caption and a summary will be even more helpful. because then you can summarize. Like the example, what we have, the basement toilet, you can simply type in the summary right in the caption or embed it in the summary field. So when the screen reader is reading through it, assuming the images you also have alt text, then it will decipher the graphic correctly for a non-sighted users. So let's do a review. For tables, avoid using table as layout tables, like we mentioned earlier. Use tables to display data rather than as a means of page layout to align content on a page, such as school teacher phone page. Then you should create a accessible table with captions or summary tags. When you have to use a table for layout, adding the summary tag and use the table caption tag to summarize the content that will be displayed in the table. For example, the table below shows nutritional value in breakfast menu, March 2008. Then you display simple tables rather than a complex table when possible. What is a complex table? Meaning the use of merged cells that span more than one or two rows or columns. And you define data tables using the TH and the TH scoop tags, like we showed earlier. And for complex data table with nested headers, you want to use the header and ID attribute instead of scope. And you use the table heading tag TH to identify cells that are either rows or column headers. If you have any more questions regarding creating data table or layout table, please contact me for additional help.